Hello and welcome to CodeSlicing. In this episode, in this series on custom modifiers, we're going to be looking at stateful modifiers that just deal with behavior. You know, it's a fairly interesting project. I think you might find it useful, but we're not going to be talking about visual aspects in this one. We're just going to be looking at behavior and using property wrappers in a ViewModifier implementation to get things working. If you missed the first two episodes, go and check them out. But if you don't care about the rest of the stuff and you just want to get on with this particular episode, then this is where you want to be because we're going to do it right now. Right, so in this example, I'm going to show you how we can use a modifier that is going to allow us to determine whether or not a VStack within a ScrollView is lazily instantiated, whether or not all the items are created up front or if they're only created as needed. We're going to compare it to what happens in the list. Now, because we are going to be using property wrappers for this, we are compelled to use a ViewModifier implementation. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is create an observable object to record all of this stuff. That looks like this. Private class, which is an observable object. It's going to have one published property, which is our count per view. And that is a dictionary because we are going to be storing this information on a per view basis. We'll give it a subscript, make it nice and easy to access. That returns an int, which is the count per view for that view name with the default value of 0. Okay, now we get onto the functions that are going to do the work. Function increment for a particular view name, which is a string. And we say that that's the count per view. We do the same thing we did in the subscript. View name, the default value of 0. We say that's plus equal to 1. We've got to be a bit more careful with the decrement method because we've got to make sure that it exists. And if it does exist, we need to ensure that it's greater than 0. So if let the current count per view for that view name takes care of the optional side of things. And now we say, does the current count have a value that's greater than 0? If so, then we decrement it. So we say count per view for that view name equals the current count minus 1. Okay, nothing too complicated in there. Now we just have to start using it, and we want to build our view modifier to use that observable object. Right, this is where the property wrapper thing comes in. So let's construct our view modifier down here. We'll say private struct view instance counter modifier, which is a view modifier. It's going to have a view name associated with it. And at this point, we're actually going to say that this is going to use the environment object property wrapper to access the instance counter that we just built. We'll worry about passing it down the hierarchy in just a minute, but this is why we have to use a view modifier in this case, because we would not be able to do this in an extension on view. So we say environment object private var instance counter, which is an instance counter. And then in the body, we use it. So we say that the content on appear, when this view appears, whichever one we've modified, when it appears, we want to take that instance counter and call increment for this view. That's going to need a self. And then on disappear, we do the opposite. We decrement it. We say instance counter decrement for that view. And now we're in a position almost to use this thing. Let's make sure that it's actually available. And I've been asked why I use this template for my views. And it's because in the previews, by default, previews is static. It's a static property. But property wrappers don't work with statics. So I've got this definition of a normal view inside it that I can then use to play around with property wrappers with no ill effects, right? So I can do right inside the preview provider, which is not going to be built along with the release, okay? So you still get that benefit, but it does mean that you can do things like this. So I can say observed object instance counter is a new instance counter. And then I can just pass it into the environment. Instance counter, just like that. Now it's going to be available to us. The last piece of the puzzle here is to add an extension to allow us to access this thing. So we'll say private extension on view instance counter for view name of string. Again, that returns some view. And we'll say as modifier view instance counter modifier with the view name that we've been passed. And in our view up here, we can now use the same environment object that we used in the view modifier. So I can say environment object private var instance counter. We've now got it. And at the bottom of this VStack, I can say title text num instances. Here's the instance counter that we've got there for, well, what are we looking for? I'm going to call it item. And now that we are displaying it, we have to actually use the modifier. We have to modify the view that we are interested in. We can do that like this. For each of those, I want to say instance counter for item. And if I resume that, then there we are. We already have our answer, at least for VStacks in a scroll view, because we've got 100 items and it's already got 100 instances of them, even though we can only see 0 to 27. All right, let's see what happens for lists. Let's comment out the scroll view and we'll change that to list. And lo and behold, list is lazy. So we've only got 13 instances, and as we scroll, you can sort of see that it briefly goes to 14 to keep things nice and smooth, but it only keeps around the number of instances it needs to display. Wonderful, we've learned something. Now, for completeness, I have transported us to the brave new world of Xcode 12 Beta 3, so we can test out what happens with the new lazy stacks. Okay, well, look at this. Here we are in Xcode 12, and we can do this, look. Get rid of those, and it still works. Fantastic. I love it. Right, so where were we? Now, what we're going to do is we're just going to stick lazy VStack in there instead of the VStack that we've got here. So let's see what happens. Look at that. We've got 100 instances. Lazy VStack. There we are. Would you believe it? 28 instances. And if we scroll, absolutely fantastic. So this is just a small example of what you can do with behavioral modifiers that aren't focusing on anything to do with the visual aspect of your application. So now you know why lazy stacks in SwiftUI 2 was such an important addition to the framework. In the next episode, we're going to be looking at how to control position of something based on its position and size. So we're going to be using state for that, which means we're going to need another ViewModifier implementation. So join me for that. It's going to be brilliant. If you like this content, consider subscribing and smash the like button. It really does help people find the channel. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them below. But in the meantime, thanks for joining me. See you next time.